Hey everyone, welcome back to Past Pawns. Today's video is going to be talking about how to master openings, how to learn them, and everything that goes into that process. So I've divided this video by timestamps, so if you're interested in a specific part, you can skip right to that. But I would suggest watching the entire video because there's going to be useful content for everything. So to begin, I think we can divide learning new openings into about four categories, and they will be up on the screen right now. This is unique compared to other videos you see on learning openings because a lot of people say that, oh, you shouldn't learn certain theory for openings until you're this and that rating, or you shouldn't learn pawn structure and such. But I personally disagree. I think that it can be beneficial to learn uh, pawn structure for the opening that you play and not necessarily master it, but just to understand the basic guidelines, which will help you create ideas and form plans when you're playing such openings. So the first step is picking and choosing an opening that you want to play, as mentioned earlier. And to do that, you need to understand what your playing style is. Now, if you're a complete beginner, it's safe to say that you probably don't have a play style, in which case you should just try things and see what you like more and just try things out. I would suggest staying away from difficult conceptual openings like the Sicilian, the Grunfold, or the Catalan if you're a beginner, because those are there are many nuances in those openings and many different ideas that would be difficult to um, understand at that level. So once you sort of understand your playing style, then you can kind of choose an opening based on that. So let's say you're a pretty reserved or defensive player, you can then probably play the Carl Khan because it's a more positional opening, and you're unlikely to get a huge attack and just a lot of initiative and punish your opponent very quickly. It's going to be a more strategic positional game where the placement of your pieces is going to be more valuable than creating some sort of attack. Now that you've chosen an opening, there's also a few things I want to mention. You should steer away from early opening traps, especially if you're a beginner, because let's say you played this and you expect people to fall for this like wayward queen attack type of thing. The problem with this is even though it might work at certain levels, and you might gain some elo, it's gonna teach you bad habits because generally developing the queen this early is never a good thing. And also people are gonna learn to punish it very fairly quickly, and this opening trap won't help you in the long run. It's actually gonna be bad for your overall chess progression. Okay, now that we've got that figured out, let's say you've already chosen opening. What do you do? Well, the first thing I would do is figure out what the pawn structure from your opening is going to be. So if you play the Grunfeld, which is a very difficult conceptual opening, but it has its own very distinct pawn structure, a lot of the time you're going to be faced with this sort of pawn structure where white has this big central control, but you have pawn breaks on c5 and generally a bishop on g7. Now, why is this? Why do you need to learn this? Well, if you don't, it's going to be very difficult for you to create plans and attacks when you're playing your own games. And even if you do come up with plans, generally speaking, if you don't know the pawn structure you're playing, you might create weaknesses in your own position and long term holes in your game. So it's important to understand that here, for example, I know that c5 is a good move because I want to break open the center. I want to, dismantle white's central mass and prevent them from taking so much space, right? So I know I have to play c5. Now, if I were to not play c5 in a pawn structure like this, black would inherently be worse just because white has more space. So you have to understand that. Now, next up, there would generally be a bishop on g7 that would stare through this h8 to a1 diagonal. It's your most powerful piece in the Grunfeld. You always have that Grunfeld bishop pressure. You're also going to be trying to push those pawns. Try to create a pass pawn, minority attack on the queen side. And once you understand those ideas, it's going to be a lot easier to know just where you should place your pieces because this is the difference between just learning moves of theory and understanding the pawn structures and the general, plans in the position you play. Because if you learn a bunch of moves of theory but you don't understand why you're playing them, you're not going to benefit from it. Although you might obviously get a better position out of the opening, just if you jot it down in your head, then you memorize everything. However, the problem is, conceptually speaking, you don't know where to put your pieces and you don't know how to navigate the middle game just because you don't understand it. So even if you lack theoretical knowledge but you understand the ideas, navigating the game is going to be a lot easier for you. Now, another example is the IQP, or the isolated queen pawn structure. It arises from a bunch of d4 openings, so it's something that you should know. It's probably one of the most common pawn structures. And the importance of knowing it is because every single game is different. Your pieces are going to be slightly differently positioned in every game. But if you understand the ideas, right, it's going to be a lot easier to know where to maneuver those pieces, like where to place them, and how to create ideas and plans around specific opening. So if you're playing white in this position, you have the isolated queen spawn. Generally speaking, you're going to be better a little bit in the middle game, especially if you have control of the square ahead of the pawn, because you will try to push the spawn and create activity and attacks on everywhere on the king side, trying to keep as many pieces as you can on the board. So that's again going to be helpful because like, oh, I don't want to trade pieces here. I'm trying to push the spawn and create a strong initiative. I shouldn't trade pieces. And vice versa, if you're playing black in this position, you're trying to control the d5 square. You're trying to place a blockade there. Generally speaking, it's going to be a knight that's going to be sitting on d5, and you're going to try to trade off as many pieces as you can because in the end game, having knight qp is bad since it cannot be supported by any like other pawns. It becomes an inherent target, and it creates weaknesses around your position. So once you understand those concepts around the openings that you play, you'll quickly like be able to create strategic plans around your opening, and you won't have to spend as much time thinking of moves because they'll be just coming to you naturally since you already know what you're planning on doing. Now, next up for our third category is actually playing the games. Now, once you've done a little bit of basic research on the pawn structure that you're going to be playing, and maybe a few moves of theory, you just memorize them, maybe a few lines or variations, just basic general stuff. Then you should go into some blitz games or some rapid games and test that opening out. Now, you don't have to get upset if you lose. It doesn't matter. It's actually even better if you lose because then you'll be able to retrieve more information from that loss than you would from a win. So as soon as you're done playing a game, you should go and analyze it and see what went wrong or what went right, and use a computer to analyze it. Use an engine. So let's say I play the Caro-Kann. Let's say my opponent plays the fantasy against me, right? And here my move would be e6. Let's say bishop b4, and he plays e3, takes, and here the main move would be queen e2, and it's pretty difficult to explain why. So I won't in this video, but I am planning on starting a series on the Caro-Kann pretty soon. So stick around for that. But let's say my opponent doesn't know that, and he takes his pawn and runs into queen h4 check, and something like this where black is clearly better. I mean, black is up a pawn, better development. I mean, white's king is just unsafe. So if you play white here and you play like the fantasy, for example, and you run into this position, you can just ask yourself, okay, so what did I do wrong here? You go into the computer analysis after the game, you check what went wrong, you find out that queen e2, for example, was the best move, and then after that, you can go and find some theory on it. So you can go into the Opening Explorer database, which can be found on chess.com and Lichess. And Lichess is free, but chess.com has, I think, a slightly better database. There's also ChessBase, which is very expensive, but I think it might be worth it. And you go to the openings database. I won't open it right now, but you guys can find it in the Learn section right under Classroom. And you play through those same moves, and then you will be able to see what other masters did in the exact same position and compare what you did wrong. And that will help you, avoid those future mistakes. So that's the main thing with analysis. So after every game, if you run into something you didn't know or you feel like you got a worse position out of the opening, just make sure you check the moves you made. Make sure you identify the mistake that you made. And for the last part, I think this is a pretty important part that you should still consider doing, but only if you're a little bit higher rated. I'd say opening theory doesn't really matter until you get into like 1500 rating and slightly higher. But opening theory is still something that should be studied, and especially if you plan on, you have big goals if you want to get a title. This is definitely something you want to learn. So once you get pretty comfortable in your opening, then you can, maybe get a book on the opening or watch some YouTube videos, maybe from me, because I'm gonna be posting opening series very soon, and you're gonna try and understand those different ideas and memorize them. So let's say you play the Grunfeld defense, right? And up to, let's say, this point. And so let's say you get up to this move, and white plays the main line. Now, generally speaking, again, the reason why you shouldn't really learn opening theory until like around 1500 is because it won't really matter. But at higher levels, people will be able to punish you for avoiding, the critical lines and playing something subpar. So let's say you don't know that you're supposed to play c5 here. This is as far as your theoretical knowledge extends, and you play something like, I don't know, knight c6, and the engine here evaluates y as like y better. It's almost +1, and let's say 92, and you can quickly get into trouble here because once white castles and moves this rook out of danger, this pawn chain will be here to stay, and you will get suffocated off the board. So until 1500, your opponents are most likely gonna blunder things and make mistakes, and so it's okay to not understand a lot of opening theory just as long as you understand the main ideas. However, once you get into high ratings, you should definitely start studying and learning lines, maybe like 10, 15 moves deep, in critical positions that you should know. And then, of course, learning how to apply them effectively and, doing things like spaced repetitions to help you memorize them, or playing against, let's say, chess.com bots where you can set up a position and then, finish versus computer, uh, which can help you a lot because, then you get to see what a computer would play and it puts you into different middle games. So it's good practice. But just anything that will help you memorize these moves is useful. Maybe writing them down on a notebook can be helpful as well. So I think that pretty much sums up everything I wanted to show for this video. I hope this was useful in terms of learning new openings and mastering them in an effective manner. And starting tomorrow or maybe the day after, I want to start my opening series on the Catalan or the Caro-Kann, the Grunfeld, the Sicilian defense, and other things that aren't covered as often on YouTube, just because they're very complex. But I want this channel to be a sort of chess encyclopedia, so I feel like I should really be covering those things and in depth. And so, if you guys are interested in that, stay tuned.